Hello everybody, and welcome back to Steven's Fight Show. Alright, so after losing his last two fights to the current unified heavyweight champion Oleksandr Usyk, Anthony Joshua made his return to the ring against Jermaine Franklin, and let's just say a lot of people weren't pleased. And I can definitely understand why, but before we point out the issues that people are having with AJ, let's point out all the positive things that he did do. So in terms of the fight itself, it was a very tactical performance by AJ. He stood behind the jab, which was his main weapon in this fight. Once it was established, that's when he was putting the right hand behind it. He did a good job of keeping the fight at distance to pick Franklin apart. The hand placement was also where it needed to be. He was blocking punches very effectively, and if we're judging this on a technical level, this is good work. He was making reads behind the jab, trying to find a home for the left hook, a couple pull counter right hands as well, and he was winning every single exchange inside the clinch with the uppercuts as well. I personally just wish he would have attacked the body a bit more, varied his offense, and thrown more feints. A lot of times it looked like he was being very predictable with the shots that he wanted to land, but overall he was doing everything that he needed to do to win. So just based off of that, if you didn't watch the fight, you would probably think that people were happy to see a performance like this, correct? Well, it turns out to be that that isn't the case. There are two problems that the public is having with AJ's performance. One, he went the distance against somebody that he should have finished if he was still an elite heavyweight. Jermaine Franklin is a solid contender, but he's not a top 5 heavyweight in the world. AJ's performance was a bit underwhelming and exciting because people were expecting him to look like vintage AJ, especially against somebody like Jermaine Franklin. This fight was pretty much booked for AJ to get a dub. I mean, losing two devastating title fights against one of the best heavyweights in the world is not easy. So to forestall your confidence from depleting any further, a dominant and exciting victory is necessary. And in case you don't know what I mean when I mention vintage AJ, go back and watch all of his fights leading up to Vladimir Klitschko. You will see a different fighter in terms of mentality. The old AJ was considered an aggressive combination power puncher. He would come forward and throw punches with vicious intentions. But if you compare that to his recent performance, I don't think there was even one time where he actually tried to press Jermaine Franklin. Although Franklin wasn't ever mentally out of the fight, AJ had the clear better game plan, and he was winning on the scorecards easily. So if AJ is at least 30% of who he used to be, this is a perfect opportunity for him to try to go for the finish, right? Wrong. Instead, he opted to continue to box to strictly score points and never really pushed the pace to try to get closer to a finish. So as a result, AJ earned a one-sided victory, and it was pretty much an exhibition for him. So immediately, as soon as the fight was over, I went on Twitter to see everyone's thoughts about the fight, and I saw bare people posting the same exact thing. AJ is not the same fighter. He's mentally broken. He'll never be X, Y, and Z, etc. And like I said before, rightfully so, I understand why people are upset. AJ's old fighting style is what made him an exciting fighter in the first place. For him to also achieve the unified heavyweight titles against one of the greatest heavyweights of all time is amazing. It's the exact reason why the UK has backed him for so many years. It's why he's a superstar and selling out arenas. But I would like to touch on two things here because these are things that have been on my mind about AJ for quite a while now. And since AJ is still in the spotlight for the same problem, I felt like this is a good video to address what I want to say. So first off, people are pointing the finger at the Ruiz loss, labeling that fight as the fight that changed AJ forever. People believe that he had become reluctant and that fire that he once had is now gone. Now, in my opinion, I think the people are right to a degree. I do agree with the fact that he hasn't quite became the same ever since the Ruiz fight. But instead of criticizing him for it, put yourself in his shoes and think logically about the situation right now. Think about that whole scenario as if you were AJ himself. So in order to do that, let's have a brief rundown of what actually happened. Andy Ruiz Jr. was a replacement fight for Jarrell Big Baby Miller, who was originally supposed to be AJ's opponent for June 1st that failed multiple drug tests before the fight. No one had really known who Andy Ruiz was before the fight, or at least the world didn't know. I think the only people that had any idea who Andy Ruiz was were only hardcore boxing fans. They didn't know Andy Ruiz like how people knew AJ. And Ruiz, he was a heavyweight contender who had skills and potential, but people weren't taking him seriously because he didn't have any mainstream attention and he wasn't a heavyweight that was in shape. Meanwhile, AJ is the champion. He had just knocked out his previous opponents. He's got power, he has fought better opponents, and his build looks phenomenal. So on paper, AJ should win against Andy Ruiz Jr. I mean, for crying out loud, Ruiz was a 13-1 underdog. The fight was pretty much set up for AJ to win. And in the fight, you knock him down in the 3rd round and it looks like it's going to be over just like all of your other fights. But then all of a sudden, AJ presses him to try to get the finish, but then he gets caught with a big punch and was never the same for the rest of the fight. And in my opinion, I actually thought he quit in that fight. He spat out his mouthpiece and it looked like he didn't want to be there anymore. He definitely didn't want to go out on a shield, that's for sure. So if you put yourself in this perspective, you not only lose, but you also get get finished in an embarrassing way as the heavyweight champion, how could you be completely the same after that? You have to think about the fact that this guy started boxing late. I'm pretty sure he started boxing when he was like 18. He probably didn't have much experience with the mental side of boxing. You haven't lost on a professional stage, and every single person you fought before that fight, you finished them. And because of that, you have this built-in confidence that you have going into every fight. So to take your first loss against somebody that you shouldn't have lost to at all, and on top of that, having the media constantly trashing your name, it's 100% a hard pill to swallow. Losing in the amateurs is not like losing in the pro game, especially when the spotlight is all on you. So mentally, it makes sense that you would feel different because the same style that finished all of your other opponents didn't finish the fighter that you should have beaten, and in return, he pushed you to a point where you had to quit for the first time ever. All I'm saying is that if you put yourself in his shoes, most likely you won't be the same as well. And if we're being honest, he was also looking past Ruiz. There were talks about him potentially fighting Fury or Wilder after he was supposed to beat Ruiz. I understand to be heavyweight champion, you have to mentally bypass these type of obstacles because you're meant to be built different. But you have to remember that these fighters are human just like you and I. They're not superhumans that can withstand anything, especially mentally. Not everyone is going to be the same, and as a matter of fact, so many world champions from several forms of combat experienced deep issues mentally. Tyson Fury was at a point where he almost wanted to end his life because his mental struggles were too much. So even though as fighters you have to be tough mentally, it's not always as easy as it seems. But earlier I did say that the world is right to an extent because after he avenged his first loss against Andy Ruiz, he had a title defense against Kubrat Pulev, and in that fight, I believe in the third round, there was a moment where AJ hit Pulev with a pull counter and he tried pressing him exactly like he used to, but because he didn't finish Pulev as quickly as he should have, that moment was heavily overlooked. So even though he didn't get the knockout earlier in the fight, the fact is that he still did it. It was just a bit unsuccessful. I believe the fire is still there. I just don't think he believes in it against top fighters because it is a risky style. Against Ruiz, AJ found out the hard way that Ruiz was a much better fighter than he thought. And Ruiz is a top heavyweight, or he's at least good enough to compete against the top 5. But against Pulev, who's not on his level, since there's no threat, he can freely press without any hesitation. But oddly, he didn't press against Franklin, and I'm not sure why. So in conclusion, I just want to end this video by asking the world, what do you want from AJ moving forward? Would you much rather see him be a play it safe and technical fighter, or do you want to see vintage AJ at its finest? Because if he fights like his old self, there's a big risk just like how it was with Andy Ruiz, but high risk means high reward, and it could reward him a finish. If AJ gets the knockout fighting that way, then cool, that's what we want. But let's say if he's the one getting finished, would that satisfy you more from a fan's perspective compared to his performance against Franklin? Because the narrative whenever AJ has a performance just like how he did against Franklin moving forward will always be AJ is not the same. But if he's overly aggressive and it backfires on him, the narrative will be AJ is not an elite fighter, he's too reckless. If you would much rather prefer AJ's vintage self regardless of what happens, then fair enough. The ball will be in AJ's court for him to decide how he fights moving forward. But if the answer is no, then I'm afraid he's in a position where he can't win. People are going to have a problem if he plays it safe and if he decides to press. And I believe it's absolutely unacceptable for a combat athlete to ever be in a situation like this, where whatever they do, the result will always be the same negatively. And to summarize it all, I just want to understand AJ. I want to know what's the issue and what's the best move for him going forward. Because the whole world seems to take on this criticism approach against AJ for years now, but that hasn't resolved anything. That hasn't influenced him to improve in any way, shape, or form. I'm not defending him by any means, I just want to think about how he feels as a fighter, because I will never get to know the pressure of being in his shoes, and neither will you. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I don't like that man, I must get to know him better." I want to know the problem that AJ is having while the whole world is saying X, Y, and Z about AJ. And that is it, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening to what I have to say, and let me know, what version of AJ would you like to see from him moving forward? Who would you like to see AJ face next? Drop a comment and let me know in the comment section down below. Now, if you guys enjoy content that is related to combat sports, please drop a like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel down below. That would be greatly appreciated. Please follow my Twitter and my blog. The links are in the description of this video. There's a ton of fight content posted on there, so if you're a hardcore combat sports fan, please check it out and let me know what you think. And other than that, it's been Steven, signing out. Peace.